Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday evening service here at Center for Spiritual Living, Greater Las Vegas. I'm Reverend Laura Hallett, and it is my pleasure to be with you again as we take this midweek break and look at some of our principles and find some practices that will help support a greater understanding and a greater experience of the principles that we are talking about. So, what is wholeness? What does it really mean? Well, I can tell you some things that it's not. It's not perfection. It means that we are embracing every single aspect of our lives and our interconnectedness to everything in the world around us. So it's embracing all of us, not just the things that we really like, but the difficulties as well. It means that we become so unified with everything and everyone in our lives, even in the times when we feel completely broken inside. Wholeness is not about perfection. It's about finding a way of being that doesn't exclude anything and that actually brings us into this congruent relationship with everything around us. So wholeness is something that we strive for. I believe that when we were first becoming sentient beings, we had a deep understanding of wholeness. If we look back at some of the indigenous societies, they were most often very much matriarchal and very much in tune with the environment around them. They ate food that was available during certain seasons. They didn't try to make something grow that wasn't possible at the time. They hadn't cultivated the ideas of agriculture that we had. They didn't eat too much of anything. They left seeds available for the next year because they knew they were going to need them. So they didn't deplete their resources. When it came to the animals around them, they didn't take all of the animals. They allowed the animals to reproduce and be there for them for the next year. They lived in harmony and balance with the world around them, not hoarding, not taking more than they needed, not doing it just because they could. When I think about this, I often think about the buffalo in North America, the bison. In the early days of our continent, the indigenous people lived and used the buffalo as a major part of their food supply. And not only their food supply, but they used it for clothing. They used it for shelters. The bones were used for all kinds of things. Every part of the buffalo was used. And yet there were still thousands and thousands of buffalo roaming the plains of North America until people came along who, through their own superiority, through their own sense of conquering something, for their own colonial ideas and ways of being, thought that they had the right to use these animals in a way that they wanted to, regardless of the future, regardless of what it did to the other people that were living in the area, regardless of what it did to anything. They shot the buffalo for sport and took very little of it and left the buffalo to rot on the plains until buffalo, the North American bison, was almost extinct. And how many other species have we done this with? We look at the trees and the plants around us that used to thrive, that are no longer even available to us. Because, again, in our quest to conquer and dominate, we have separated ourselves from so much of the natural world. So that's just one way that living a divided life shows up. But there are some really interesting ways where we might not necessarily think we were living a divided life. Parker Palmer lists several of them in here, and so I just wanted to talk about a few of them here. So a divided life shows up in a lot of our work, a lot of the things that we do for work. It can show up when we agree to do something. We don't really want to do it, but we agree to do it, and then we only make a half-hearted effort, or we phone it in, dial it in. It's It's when we engage in activities or work that fundamentally violates our basic values, and we stay at the job. It's when we remain in those jobs or even a setting, a relationship, a living environment that is actually killing our spirit. The divided life shows up when we are willing to achieve personal gain at the expense of others. It shows up when we avoid conflict or challenge or change, even when we disagree with the other people involved in the situation, when we walk away, when we stay silent, when we refuse to engage because we just don't want to deal with the conflict around it. It also shows up when we conceal our true identities because we are afraid of being criticized or attacked or even shunned. It's when we say one thing and do another. I know myself, I've engaged in some of these activities in the past, and I know I suffered from it. So if we suffer from these things, why do we still do it? What causes us to want to, or not even want to, but to actually be okay with living a divided life? Well, I think this starts when we're very young, and we begin to see gaps in things that our young mind can't quite reconcile. And so to keep ourselves safe, we engage in ways that are actually contrary to our best interest. We see gaps between what is possible and what is our reality, and we settle for the reality instead of striving for what is possible. In his book, Radical Wholeness, Philip Shepard says this: when our thinking unmoors itself from the body, we come to feel and believe that we are superior to the world and distinct from it, and the fate of humanity is somehow sealed and independent from that of life on earth. Because we've seen this divide within our world, and we figured out a way to overcome it, we often get a sense of superiority, which is absolutely contrary to inclusivity. This is one of the stories that our culture has fully embodied, a sense of superiority over others, especially here in our North American culture. We often have this single-minded focus that supports capitalism, that seeks to accumulate wealth, to accumulate possessions at the expense of everything else and everyone else in the world. We have a tendency to feel so superior that we can eliminate our concerns for other people. You know, throughout history, we've seen this in hundreds of ways. But a lot of it came in this idea of this colonialism, of going to a place and conquering the savages that lived there. And unfortunately, sometimes that conquering also included enslaving the people of these countries that we invaded, that our ancestors invaded, and have allowed us to continue to profit from that conquering mentality that has been so prevalent throughout our history of our world. So how do we begin to reconcile all of this? How do we begin to live a life that is congruent with who we feel like we are inside? For me, this began when I got clear about what my authentic reality was, who I felt like inside. And then I took steps to align myself in an outward expression of what I felt like inside. When my authenticity and my integrity could no longer be content with living a divided life, when my outer world felt so incongruent to my inner world, that change was absolutely necessary for me to continue. There was no way I could not continue to live the way that I was living before. And a lot of that has come through my spiritual practices. I remember how surprising it was for me to realize that I actually couldn't lie anymore. Not that I was a big liar in the first place. I mean, mostly it was little, what we call white lies, just little, somebody had asked me to do something and I would make up an excuse. Or I didn't get something done and I would come up with some reason for doing that, where I knew that all of that was not true. But it just, I could avoid the conflict. I could avoid the uncomfortable feelings that went along with admitting that I didn't want to do it or that I hadn't done it in the first place and all of these things. But the day that I realized I couldn't do that anymore was actually kind of surprising to me. That there was this feeling inside of me that those words could no longer come out of my mouth. And I took ownership for whatever, and I honestly can't remember what the situation was, but I took ownership for my part in it. It was like this outer expression of me could no longer be so disconnected from the inward feelings that I had. And then that just began to snowball and just began to show up in lots of different ways in my life. I began to change my physical appearance to match who I felt like I was inside. I began to speak, and I love this phrase, speak truth to bullshit. Speak truth when it was necessary. I remember sitting in a faculty meeting and we were talking about, I taught in middle school, and we were talking about live shooter drills. We had, this was it's still going on, unfortunately, where we had to not live, active shooter drills. That's what they were called. So it's a time when we practice what to do if someone comes into the building with a gun. And we were in this faculty meeting and our principal just kept going on and on about, this is going to happen. We have to do these practices because this is going to happen. This is the reality of the world that we live in right now. This is going to happen. And I remember I was sitting there towards the back of the room, and without even taking thought or anything else, when he said it like the third time, this is going to happen, I remember saying out loud, or not. And people looked around me like, what the heck? What do you mean or not? This is what we're having, because, my belief system had changed right then. And it's like, yes, it is a reality of our world that we unfortunately have people going into schools and shooting up the children and the teachers that are there. But it didn't have to be our experience. And I knew that it didn't have to be our experience, and I could no longer stay quiet about that. And so my inner life was now beginning to express itself outwardly. And I felt more in alignment with who I actually felt like I was. And this aligned life is a representation of wholeness, is living in a way that is congruent with my inner expression and my outer expression, congruent with each other, to the point where, again, I can no longer stay silent. I could no longer allow my feeling of comfortableness to override any feelings or obligations that I had to speak up in situations where things needed to be spoken. And so I think this is possible for all of us as we become more clear. And it can show up for people in different ways. Mine happened to show up by speaking my truth. For other people, it can show up in a way of being in relationship with the world around us, the natural world, and so forth. If you're interested in more of that, I'm going to be doing a series on Thursday mornings for our Keeping It Real on something that's called ecosomatics, which is where our body, our soma, becomes more in line with our ecology, with the world around us. And so it's a very practical way of feeling more whole in our lives in a more global way. So you might want to tune into that. It's Thursday mornings at 9 a.m. broadcast here on our YouTube channel. So let's take this into practice. Let's see what we can bring about in our lives through changing how we believe about things, how we actually think about things. And so, as I said, for me, this has been a practice of utilizing various forms of our spiritual practices to do that. And one of the ones that I used most frequently was our prayer, our spiritual mind treatment. If you're not familiar with it, it's a type of affirmative prayer. You know, most often when we think of prayer, we think of somebody dropping to their knees saying, "Oh God, please, if you'll do this for me, I'll do this, or I'll never do this again." Or, it's this whole bartering and begging, pleading form of communicating with that spirit, whatever you want to call it. Generally, it's based on a belief that spirit, God, the divine, whatever you want to call it, is outside of ourselves. But here at Science of Mind, we know that we are part of that spirit, that it is an indwelling presence that is within us. And so we don't have to beg, plead, or barter with it. We just simply state truth, to remind ourselves of that truth, to begin to bring that into our experience by just simply reminding ourselves of it. And so it has 5 stages. In the first stage, we identify what spirit is to us, what it means to us, and do this in a way that begins to evoke the feeling of spirit. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, called this the fire. So we begin to develop the fire. And then that continues into our second stage, which is unification. Since we know that God is all there is, we know that we are one with it, and we make statements that remind us of that truth. And then our third stage is our realization, where we actually, again, make those statements of truth to remind ourselves of what is here, what is possible, what is unfolding in our lives. And then we give thanks, because gratitude is always one of the most important spiritual practices that we can do. And because we know all of this is true, we just simply then release it. We let it go. We don't have to revisit it again. We just simply let it go and know that it is happening right now. So if you would, just join with me as I go through a spiritual mind treatment here. I like to close my eyes. If that works for you, go ahead. Just take in a breath or two to just simply allow yourselves to connect with your body. And so in this deep sense of peace and connection, I simply know that there is only one thing happening right here, right now. It is the action and the activity of the divine, that one creative, loving presence that has brought everything into existence, that all-pervasive power, that love intelligence, that place of perfect peace. I know that this divine creator resides right at the heart of my being. That it is living its life through me right here and right now. I know that there is absolutely no separation between it and I, for we are one. And because I know this is true for me, I know this is true for everyone. That each one of us is that perfect, divine, unique emanation of that creative, loving intelligence. That each one of us is that vessel through which God shows up. Our hands are the hands of the divine. Our voices are how God is heard. And our feet move us about doing its good work. And so knowing this truth, I speak my word. I know that each one of us is completely and wholly centered in the divine. I know that Spirit sees absolutely no separation. That it is just allowing itself to be perfectly in us, as us, expressing through us, in all that we are and all that we do. I know that we are one with every creation, everything that has ever been, everything that is yet to be. Because as scientists say, there is absolutely no way to destroy any matter. It is already in existence right here, right now. Whole and complete. And I know that because we are whole and complete, our lives are aligned with a divine purpose, with a power and a presence that is always unfolding itself through us in the work that we do, in the words that we say, in the love that we share. I know that this is a world of wholeness, complete within itself. And how good it is to know this. How good it is to feel it, how good it is to see it happening right here and right now. I just give great thanks for this. I give great thanks for the willingness of each person, each creation, to be a conduit for the divine. And I release this word into the law, into that creative aspect of the divine that is always unfolding itself in perfection and wholeness. I let this go and I let it be. And so it is. Amen. So I invite you to join us each Wednesday night as we explore more of the idea of wholeness. As I said, we're going to talk a little bit about it from several different points of view. These 3 books that I have different and distinct ideas about wholeness, and yet all have that one underlying truth that we are all, as Parker Palmer wrote it, we are wholly holy. We are divine and we are one. So join us each Wednesday night, 7 p.m. for a little bit of discussion and a little bit of spiritual practice. Have a great week, everyone. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.